Hi, what we're going to do today is we're going to go through key issue 1 and 2 of chapter 13, urban patterns, and we're going to talk a little bit about downtowns, and then we'll also talk about models of urban development. One of the things that we need to make sure that we understand is that development varies from country to country, and then also so do the urban structures and the urban layout. So not all developing countries lack an urban area. However, their urban area may be set up differently than what it is, say, in the U.S. These are the cities that they talk about throughout the chapter of Rubinstein in chapter 13. You need to be aware of where they are located in case you see them on a quiz. Some of the main concepts that we'll be talking about are things such as central city, urban areas, and things like that. The CBD, of course, is going to be very important, and you need to understand what type of services and businesses, etc., are located in the CBD. But whenever we talk about a downtown or an urban area, you need to understand that in developing countries, people migrate towards the cities in large numbers because they're looking for work. Whereas in developed countries, say the U.S., people tend to move out of the city and into the suburbs. So here we have this term central city, which is defined as an urban settlement that is legally incorporated into an independent self-governing unit known as a municipality. Now, it is interesting to note that since 1950, a lot of the central cities have been decreasing in population. So cities such as, say, Cleveland or Detroit, St. Louis, they have decreased in population. And I just want to note here that when we were talking about consumer services in more developed countries in reference to the central place theory, we talked about hamlets, villages, towns, and cities. What we're doing here is in chapter 13, we're talking more about counting number of inhabitants per square mile and understanding that, and also it's how we blend it in or how we make it work for our census and how we use the data from our census to understand better these urban areas as well as the rural areas. But getting back to central city, you need to understand that central cities are urban settlements. It's self-governing unit, and that it, again, they've been decreasing in population since 1950s. But urban areas is an urban area is a different way of looking at urban settlements because it consists of the central city and its surrounding built-up suburbs. So you may have something like Greater Baton Rouge area or Greater New Orleans area. There's another term, two other terms actually, that you need to know and be able to differentiate between, and that's going to be metropolitan statistical area, which is going to be an urbanized area with a population over 50,000 people, and then you need to know a micropolitan statistical area, and you need to understand also that about 9% of Americans live in a micropolitan statistical area. Both of these areas or statistical areas are used by the census, and remember that the census is taking place this year, so you have to answer all those citizen questions, or at least your family does. So again, another important term that you're going to need to know in this chapter is the CBD, also known as the Central Business District. And the CBD is located in the downtown area, and it is usually the most visually distinctive area. It is also, supposedly one of the easiest parts of town to get to. However, if you live through Baton Rouge and New Orleans traffic, you know that is not always the case. Another characteristic of the CBD is that it tends to be the focal point or the hub for the region's transportation network. So you may have, the bus main terminal or the main hub for buses in the CBD or close to. Another characteristic is that whenever the original settlers settled in the area, they tended to settle near rivers and streams or rivers and, some other type of water so that they had transportation options outside of their settlement. So in the CBDs, you do have services ranging from public services, such as the court, historic buildings, or the library. And if you use downtown Baton Rouge as an example, we have, the court there. We also have a museum. You also have the old state capitol. You have the new library being built. There's also the Raising Cane's Convention Center. And then you have lots of business services such as law offices. Because of the courts being so close, you have the law offices there. You also may have the central office for a bank in Baton Rouge located in the CBD. But in addition to the public services, the sports and convention centers, and business services, you have to have the consumer services to meet the needs of the people in that area. So the people who are working at City Hall, or the people who are working at the museums, they need to have a place to get their coffee. They may need a place to get something to eat. All right, and keep in mind that the CBD of one city is going to be different from the CBD of another city. So the needs for consumer services is going to change in New Orleans versus what we have in Baton Rouge. Okay, so the range for the retailers in New Orleans is going to be a lot longer than the range for the retailers in downtown Baton Rouge. So again, remember, we have these general concepts, but you always have to make sure that you keep in mind the locality that you're applying these general terms to. Alright, here I just have a few facts and definitions. If you want to look through this, you can. I'm not going to test you on this, but I haven't really seen a lot of questions on the AP this detailed about statistical areas, but it's here in case you want it. So this is just, again, an image of downtown New Orleans. We have entertainment, we have the Superdome, we have the Saints, we have the Smoothie King Center for concerts, but even though the Superdome is also used for concerts. Then we also have the CBD, and you can see the river in the background. Again, re-emphasizing that the original settlements were near sources of water, albeit New Orleans be below sea level, which is why they moved the capital to Baton Rouge. So, and this is just another example of a layout in Louisville, Kentucky, if you would like to look at it. I had this here to talk about Navy Pier and how entertainment is used near waterways and how the CBDs have changed over time, whereas in Chicago this may have been like an area where transportation hub or break of bulk point, you could say, in Chicago, and now it is an entertainment area. However, because of coronavirus, it is closed for the moment. I also have some information here about bid rent theory. We've already covered this, but I'm going to leave the information here so you can pause it and look through it. And it just talks about rent that someone is willing to pay, and based on what their profit will be. So the bid rent theory, making sure you do need to know that, but we've already talked about this a little bit in previous lessons. So again, in CBDs, you have to think about you only have so much space, but you have a lot to be done. And since you can't keep growing out, what do? You grow up. And in places such as California, they grow down. So vertical geography is one of these things whenever your skyscraper is built, because you can't go out, so you go up, and you can still house businesses, retailers, etc., but without having to take up more land. There are also underground cities, which could be anything from a garage to maybe using these underground areas for lines. I have the note here about cities in cold weather climates such as Minneapolis, Montreal, and Toronto have underground pedestrian passages and shops. But then they'll also use underground areas for let's say, electrical lines, because it prevents, you know, either a heavy snow from pulling down electric lines, or maybe a really bad storm when trees are falling over from those trees, knocking down power lines. So again, understanding that, you know, cities will either grow, instead of expanding out, they'll grow up, or again, they'll grow down. I'm still amazed by the number of underground parking garages in California with the number of earthquakes that exist over there, but they do it and they're okay with it. So usually you do not have a lot of people living in the CBDs, and that's because the rent is so high. Now, if you have a really extremely well-paid CEO, then, you know, works downtown, sure, they can afford an apartment or a condo in the downtown CBD area, but most people for the residential areas tend to live outside of the CBD. So you need to understand that downtowns are distinctive because they have business, public, and some consumer services that cluster in the CBD. But also keep in mind that the CBD has relatively few manufacturers, and again, not many people live there because of the high rent. And the North American CBDs, they have a distinctive vertical feature, as well as a below ground aspect to their CBDs that help them grow without having to grow out. They're able to grow up. When we move to Key Issue 3.2, we're going to talk about urban land models. You must know and understand the concentric zone model by Burgess, as well as the sector model by Hoyt, and the multiple nuclei model by Harris and Ullman. And I will talk about that in the next